to Pine Tree Pulse. From the county to down east Maine. From Casco Bay to Mount Katahdin. We keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in Maine and across the nation. Brought to you by the Maine Policy Institute. Free markets, free people. Pine Tree Pulse begins now.
So I have a very special guest today on the Pine Tree Pulse. We're very pleased to welcome into our show Scott Wellman, who serves as Maine Policy Institute's chairman of our board of directors. And I'm inviting him on for a very specific reason. Scott I've known for many years and has, I think, a particular expertise that he can lend us as we discuss policy issues that affect us in Maine. You know, one of the ones that has cropped up in the last couple of years, Scott, is the advent of this new paid family medical leave law and its implementation, the effect on healthcare costs and all the things that go into this. And you know this certainly better than I do. So inviting you on the show to talk a little bit about it is, I think, a good idea. So my first question to you, maybe as an introduction for the audience, for those who don't know you, is maybe just to actually give yourself little credentials here. Like, how is it that you have developed an expertise in this? Why are we talking today? What's your background? Give the people a little bit of background on Scott Wellman.
Absolutely. So my background prior to my current role, I spent about 14 years as the CFO and other executive roles at a couple manufacturers in Maine. And one of those manufacturers, Puritan Medical Products and Hardwood Products, was in the news a lot. We grew during COVID.
That's a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, we did some great things, but one key thing that I was involved in that really got me into what I'm doing now is we had a self-funded health plan, and we managed the health plan for our employees. And I learned a lot about what we can do to kind of take care of our employees, but also the costs associated with it. Fast forward a couple years ago, I made a career change where I entered the employee benefits space as a consultant, helping employers to understand what's in the market, how you can manage costs better. And one of the big things that we've been dealing with is Maine paid family leave for those groups that are in Maine, and really understanding how this works and how you can make some better decisions strategically to work within the state program, because unfortunately, I think it's here at least for the near term.
I think it's here for a while.
Yeah.
That means difficult to, I think, go back and change it, although there will be attempts, and that gets into who wins elections, and we can ignore that for now. I actually want to talk a little bit about the issue itself, and sort of educate the audience in general about how it even works. I mean, the proposal that Maine ultimately adopted, and I know that there was other proposals too. They had a referendum that they were threatening to do that was a little bit, I think a little bit worse, frankly, in the end. But Mills ultimately ended up accepting a compromise inside the legislature, which to me isn't much of a compromise. I think it's a pretty problematic program. So I guess maybe my question for you would be, for those who are uninitiated in what this program is and does and how it works.
Yep.
Maybe just top line, explain it a little bit and give us the background on like sort of where it came from and what it does.
Okay. So the Maine paid family leave is essentially a payroll finance social insurance program that the state decided to put in place so that employees would have some type of paid leave. The intention, I think, was all employees should have some way to have paid leave in certain instances. So there's medical instances, child bonding, military leave. There's a few different things, and I'm probably not going to get all of them right now. But in general, it opened up a new system that allowed for 12 weeks of paid leave under a specific formula, and all employers essentially in the state have to participate in this. If you're, I believe there might be an exclusion if you are under 2 employees, but that's essentially those single self-employed people are not involved. And the structure of it is a new payroll tax. They didn't want to call it that. They said they weren't raising taxes, but every one of us in January 1st of 2025 started paying, in general, 0.5% from the employee and 0.5% from the employer to start pre-funding a contingency fund for this program.
So before it actually began. So you actually sort of preloaded it with money so that it could actually work.
Yes, 16 months ahead of when it's going to begin. So we started in January. The first 3 months, everyone had to pay into. So you had no option. There's no way to get out of it. Everyone paid in their combined 1%. After you got to April of 2025, that's when there were some options where employers could opt out of the state program and move into an approved replacement plan. And those approved replacement plans are just essentially the exact same benefit run by an insurance company instead of administered by the state. So at that point in time, my industry got really busy of talking to employers all over the place, trying to figure out, hey, is there a better option for you? And a better option actually means two different things. One, obviously, is cheaper.
Yeah.
So a lot of businesses were looking to say, hey, can I save money? And there were a lot of cases where you could. And the reason for that is the state is setting up a pool based on all the employers around the state, all the employees in the state. They're trying to use large numbers and run the tables and decide, okay, how much money do we need to have to fund this? And they've done that. They set it at 1%. Well, when you go and you look at your individual workforce, the insurance company that's underwriting it looks at, okay, what is the specific demographics here? Your age, your gender, the type of industry you're in, the historical need to actually take leave. So
basically calculating how likely it is somebody takes it.
Yes, it's individualized risk instead of population risk. And
so if you have a population of people who work somewhere where you have a very low risk of needing it, like, you know, maybe you're older and not in childbearing years, but you're not so old that you have aging parents or things like that, you fall in a zone which might be able to give you some sort of savings cost-wise.
Yes. So I would use as two types of examples. One that you'd have a good rate. You take a construction company in Maine. Those roles don't typically take this type of leave. Maybe some of it is they don't typically have it offered, but in general, on the nationwide, looking at the data, those groups are lower risk for this, so their costs are better. On the other hand, you take a hospital or a medical practice, and they may have more people that are in the demographic mix for taking leave. So when those two groups go out and have the underwriting done, a construction company is going to get probably, on average, a lower rate. So they may say, hey, I'm going to move out of the state program because I'm going to save X percentage. And that means my employees pay a lower tax in and I pay a lower tax in. I mean, it's not going to the state anymore. It's going to the insurance company. That hospital may see a higher rate. And then they're going to make the determination at that point of, do I want to stay in a state-funded program, or do I want to still pay a little bit more because an insurance company is going to manage this, and that's a for-profit business that is going to make sure that things are handled correctly. I've seen groups that have made the choice to pay 10 to 20% beyond the state program,
just because of who's running it,
because they trust the insurance company running it, and they feel like they're kind of removed from the situation a little bit and having a professionally run program. So they're actually willing to pay more in some cases.
So you're saying that you're suggesting, I suppose, in saying this, that the government run program itself is so questionable that people are trusting insurance companies.
Yes.
I mean, I don't mean to put too fine a point on it, but
I get your point that sounds.
I mean, it's not a very popular thing.
It's not a popular thing. But
when you have to do the actual administration of it, like, you do have to start asking questions about how likely it is you're going to get it administered right, and, you know, the cost of it versus your benefits, and
whether I'm talking to a business owner or their HR director, they both have the same type of concern about the state program versus a privately run program. These programs that are being run by private insurance companies are companies that have disability insurance. They have other leave programs they're already running. They're just having to follow the main rules now. So they've done this. My concern a little bit on the state level is I don't know that we've ever run a program quite like this, and I don't know who's administering it. But we're all going to find out on May 1st when they all open up the system to, if someone needs leave, that they can take that.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question here, is that I know, as it relates to the design of this program, that much of the criticism centered around who gets to take leave, for what reasons, for how long, and all the things swirling around that. We really haven't been hit with that yet. Employers have not been hit with that yet. What's your expectation? I mean, knowing what the actual rules and the law says, I think there's a lot of people that are a little bit worried that you're going to see a whole bunch of people missing for 12 weeks, and it's a lot of companies really struggling to replace that person, because in many of the smaller ones, you have individuals who are incredibly important to the functioning of that company. And if that one person is missing for a while, it's not like an easily replaceable thing with a temp or something like that. So
the conversation that we're having right now is a conversation that I've had with employers looking at what do we do. The cost aspect of this is one critical piece that everyone's having to pay in and pay more. So the cost of labor's gone up, but especially on smaller employers, they're very concerned about May 1st, what happens. So the underlying policy says what is an acceptable reason for leave. So I think there's going to be a fair amount of education that has to be done on. There may be people that think they're qualified for leave that aren't qualified for leave, and the employers are not making that determination. That's done based on statute, and it specifically says what is or isn't approved.
Is there any vagary with it? I mean, what I'm trying to envision is whether there's disputes in the future. It's like, it says this, and I think it means this. You think it means that. So I'm going to sue you over it because you're not giving me the leave.
There are some vagaries. So the one piece that is unique about Maine's law, and there are laws like this in a lot of different states, but virtually no two states have drafted the same law. So every state is its own kind of fiefdom of how do I manage this. But Maine put in language that concerns me a little bit, which is a family-like relationship. And they have a framework for what a family-like relationship is. But I think it has to do with geographical proximity, financial relationship. And the way I read it is it's much broader than saying family. And in Maine, family can be pretty clearly defined. The number of different programs that clearly say, okay, here's what is covered, whether it's immediate family, parents, in-laws, children, cousins, adopted children, foster children, all of those things are usually defined in statute. Those are all covered under this plan, but then the family-like relationship is different. And I think that's where we're going to see the first kind of challenge of what is a family-like relationship and what isn't a family-like relationship. And for employers, that's where the concern is how do I model what type of frequency I'm going to have people going out on leave? Because most of these companies haven't had this type of program before. The smaller employers, sub 50 employees, they don't have extra staff on hand to back everybody up on every role. And when someone's out for 12 weeks, that could cause them some hardship, and they've got to find a way to work through that right now. There's not anything considered in the law for how does that employer get through, because they must legally hold that job for those 12 weeks. And because Maine's law doesn't mimic the FMLA rules, there are things that qualify you under Maine law that wouldn't qualify you for FMLA at the federal level. You could have someone out for 12 weeks in Maine and then come back and still have their 12 weeks of federal.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, it's the laws don't interact, and the
federal law is unpaid. Though,
it's unpaid.
Right? You're entitled to have your position and be able to be gone, but you're not getting paid for it, and that's the main difference between the two.
Yes, but from the employer's standpoint, they're still looking at how do I complete the tasks that we need to with someone out for up to 24 weeks of a 52-week year. That becomes burdensome. So there's some concern there. And the HR departments at these companies are having to figure out, how do I administer this correctly? And how do I make sure I'm not running afoul of a federal standard versus a state standard? And even people are choosing to outsource that whole function and say, hey, I'm going to pay an outside organization to manage this for me or help me manage it because there's too many moving parts. And if you add in an employer that's based in Maine but has employees in 5 or 10 different states, they could be dealing with up to 10 different rules on top of this. And I'm not trying to say we need a federal rule for this. That's not what I would like. But the reality is there's so many pieces that are moving all the time that it's adding a lot of complexity to running a business and making the environment a little harder to operate from the business standpoint.
Well, and cost too. I mean, if you're talking about compliance needs and you're talking about hiring companies that can coordinate this and that, that's just added cost for the beyond the cost of the tax.
Yes.
Onto the business. And that means things for prices. That means things for obviously affordability, hiring. I mean, when you're paying all this extra money, you could hire an employee, but you can't because you now have to do this instead, and so on and so forth. That strikes me as pretty short-sighted, although I know my opinion on this is pretty obvious, but it's
it's adding a lot to cost, and it's direct cost on the whatever the rate is that you're paying for those employee wages. And then it's adding all of that back end cost that you don't really know what that is until you start going through and running through the process of how much utilization there is on these programs. And from the utilization front, you and I both know from talking, and I think most of the listeners know, once you set up any sort of social insurance program and people start to see that it works and they can file a claim and it will get paid, you tend to see a growth in the number of people. And looking at this from just a paid leave basis, the state of Washington put in a program, and over the course of the first 3 to 5 years, it was about a 15% increase in utilization each year.
Wow.
So
well beyond their estimates.
Oh, well, I don't know how much it was beyond the estimates, but it does concern me I'm a finance guy at heart. And when you start thinking about the math, there's actuarial models that the state has used to say, okay, 1% should fund this because we pre-funded it for 16 months. Well, the 16 months of pre-funding is really only from the people that are staying in the state program. All those people that got out of the program back in April of 25 or at some point after that, they're able to stop paying into the state program. So many businesses, I would probably even say most businesses, are not in the state program anymore, and they were able to stop collecting from their employees, stop remitting to the state, and stop paying their portion, and they will start paying after May 1st. When they submit their payroll information to their insurance company, they'll get an invoice and they'll pay that back. But that funding being lower has a real impact on where does this plan sit in year 2. So the law and the guidance says the plan has to be funded to remain solvent, which is really scary government language in my view. And that if they're going to have an increase of more than 0.1%, that they must provide legislative notice, I believe.
So not legislative approval, but a legislative notice?
I'm not sure. We're going to find out at the end of the first year, where's the plan running and how's it work. And there are some states where these programs have run well and they haven't had to raise the rates. The states where they've run the best are the states where the most employers had to stay in. Like the state of New Jersey has a good program from the standpoint of keeping employers in it. And because of that, you've got the large pool and your actuarial numbers work. In Maine, with most employers leaving, and also I would say most of the lower risk employers are probably leaving because they're getting very good rates. You've got a situation of they weren't paying in as much during that first 16 months. The groups that are staying in are the ones that would, in the individual market or the individual business market, receive a higher rate.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was actually something I was going to ask you about. It strikes me as ill-designed for that very purpose, right? If you're saying that people who would have a lower cost ultimately have an incentive to leave and basically have some sort of outside plan, right? Those are lower cost because the people will utilize it less. I mean, as you described at the top end of our conversation. So the remaining people are the heavier users probably, and there's less being paid in from the lighter users to essentially support them. It strikes me as inevitable that that's going to be something that's going to require cost increases for the tax and have the tax go up.
There's lots of data that points that way. Unfortunately,
Imagine my surprise.
Yeah, until we get there, we're not going to know.
And you're talking about data from other states, or
no? I mean the actual claims data.
Oh, okay.
Once we get through, I would say 9 months, they should start knowing what it is. But if they're having to wait until most of the way through the first plan year before they're making a determination of what the new rate's going to be, it could be at the point where the math changes and they need to make a much larger increase. The good news for the employer population that's out there is if people have elected to stay in the state program because they were one of those high-risk groups, or it just seemed like a headache, or they didn't have someone telling them, hey, you can get out of this and you should look at something else, they can still leave today before the May 1 plan year starts, and they can still leave at some point in the future if they look at it and say, hey, the rates are going up, it's now 1.2% or 1.5%, and that's beyond what we want to pay. We want to look at what our individual rating is. That's a simple process to have the evaluation done. So there's options for everyone out there, and I don't want people to think that the sky is falling from this, but there are a lot of signs that say we don't know where this is going to settle. I think it's going to take 2 or 3 years before we know, okay, what is the actual rate that needs to be contributed at the state level to fund this state program. And unfortunately, if more groups that are at the better performing side leave the state program, you've got the situation of having the more high utilizers staying in the pool and kind of doubling down that cost increase. It's kind of like the reason behind the individual mandate within the Affordable Care Act was we need everybody buying health insurance, because if only the sick people buy insurance, it's going to be incredibly expensive. Yeah. So it's the same idea here, but with this program, there is an option to get out. And I'm glad that option is there, because from an employer standpoint, in being able to model cash flow and project what you're going to do, it's a great tool to use. And everyone should have at least evaluated it, because it's from a standpoint of the employer, it's generating 1 or 2 basic reports and sharing them with your partner that does that work for you. That's what I do for my partners. And looking at the data, and within a few days, you can usually know, okay, I can get a better rate, or I'm going to stay in the state program.
So you mentioned to me when we were going to go on here before we started the podcast that there's some elements here too that are a little bit different for some of the larger companies versus the smaller ones. And, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but obviously there's the leave portion of how they're different, with like there being a nexus point. And if this person's out, oh my God, what do we do? But there's also a financial aspect of that as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect to see with those different size companies and how they're going to actually ultimately deal with this kind of thing? Because there's tons of pitfalls that are sitting there for all of them. But I would suspect that the larger companies are obviously better able to adapt to it, because they can sort of absorb it across a much larger pool of employees and the larger revenue and everything else that makes it a bit easier for them to adapt to. But small guys, it's probably a pretty big problem, I would imagine. So,
and we'll break it down instead of just saying large and small. Like in Maine, if you're an employer that's got probably 300 or more employees, you probably have a good HR staff that is going to be able to manage this and has relationships, and you've got probably already have disability insurance for your employees, you have life insurance, and those companies being the same ones that run these paid leave programs, you probably purchased a paid leave program from that same carrier you're working with. So you've got a unified spot to help you manage that claim, and it's going to be a little bit of friction that's generated because you've got different people being out. But a lot of those larger companies already had parental leave programs. So they were paying people paternity leave and maternity leave. And it's not going to be that big of a change for those groups. You get down to the next tier down from maybe 50 to 300 employees, which is there's a lot more of those than there are the over 300 in the state of Maine. Those companies are kind of caught in the middle where it's going to be troublesome depending on who the person is that goes out on leave. You probably don't have the bandwidth within your current staffing to manage leave effectively. So you're going to have some internal compliance type work that needs to be done and figuring out how are you going to do this. But you may still be able to help spread the load of that person being out amongst your team because you're a large enough employer.
You have enough numbers.
Yeah, you've got enough. It's not going to be seamless. It's not going to cause it's not going to make it so that workload doesn't increase for some people, but it's probably manageable. The real concern that I have is on your sub 50 employee businesses or even sub 20, you start getting to the point where when people are out for an extended period of time, do you have the skill set to replace that work? Can it get done, or do you need to now budget to hire some sort of outsourced help, a fractional employee to help these things? And I think of roles like if this were someone's CFO or it was their controller or their head of HR, their head of operations, they may not have someone that can step into that role internally. The business owner is going to fill in some of those things in a smaller business, or they may need to look at how do I hire someone on a fractional basis to help make sure that things don't fall through the cracks, which is going to be another expense that people haven't planned for. And it's really hard to plan for it because you don't know who's going to be out at any point in time. And the smaller employers, I think, are going to really feel the brunt of that. And we're really going to find that out after May 1st. I've heard from business owners that have said, yeah, I've got people asking me, when does that program start? I've seen that I've been paying for it. I want to take leave starting May 1st.
Oh, lovely.
Unfortunately for the employee too, they don't understand exactly what the program is. And they may or may not have a valid reason. If they have a valid reason, it's going to get approved, and that employer is going to have to deal with not having that employee there. If they don't have a valid reason, then they're going to have it denied, and the employer is going to have to deal with a disgruntled employee through no action that they've taken, but because the state program didn't deliver on what the employee thought it would do.
So you'd mentioned a little earlier that there are other states, obviously, that have programs like this.
Yep.
It's sort of amusing to me when we hear a lot of people in other countries criticize the United States and say that, we don't have a national paid family medical leave law or whatever. That criticism is partially true, but we have so many states that have them that we kind of effectively do have these programs in at least a big chunk of the country. Are there places you would single out as the places that do it right? If you wanted to do something like this, you have several concerns about the Maine program, obviously, right? Is there another place that has a better setup that would be less open to, you mentioned the sort of like family definition, right? I mean, that guy was like a father to me, 300 years ago.
Absolutely. So
next door neighbor, like that kind of thing. Obviously, there's got to be other states that deal with it differently.
Yeah, and I'm not certain that there's any state that is far and away doing it right. I am a more open markets type of guy, so I would say the approach that I would prefer to see is if states want to encourage this behavior, then give businesses some level of enticement, like what has been done on health insurance, and provide a tax incentive for the expenses related to this.
So the carrot rather than the stick.
I would much prefer the carrot rather than the stick. And I know there are carriers out there that offer paid leave programs that are trying to fill the gaps in those states that don't have it. Because I think there's I think it's 26 states have some level.
I'm looking at the map right now.
Of state leave, and then you have, when you look at that map, what you've got to look at is you've got to read all the asterisks at the bottom, and see that some states are mandatory, other states are optional. So that's not all the same. The program of paying employees during leave for these situations that impact their lives, there's a business case to have these things covered. You want to take care of your employees. You just might want to structure it in a way that works best for you. And if you allowed employers to buy those policies where appropriate and gave them an incentive, I think you're going to see a little more innovation and a lot less kind of one size fits all. And truthfully, I'm very familiar with the Maine law.
Yeah,
because
you have to be.
I live in Maine. I work in Maine. I've been in Maine my whole life. I deal with employers that are across the country. And when we're looking at multi-state employee situations, it's more of a, hey, we've got to go out with a fine-tooth comb and look and understand what's going to work here. But a carrot rather than a stick would be a great choice, I think, and allowing the market to kind of set up what these are. You may say, hey, these are the minimum standards that you need to have. But one of the things that people won't talk about that much in Maine, and you're a math guy, so I think you'll appreciate this, is, okay, how do they get to what the limit is of what's being paid? And how do they get to where the limits are for what you're paying in your tax? So we'll get a little bit in the weeds here. But the limit for what the maximum amount is that can be paid is based on the state average weekly wage. So it's a little under $1,200. I don't have the exact $1,198 and change, but call it $1,200 a week is what the maximum amount that anyone can get paid on this state leave plan.
So it's not tied to whatever you make in your salary.
It is to a certain extent, but there's a cap. So if you're a lower wage earner, you're going to have a higher percentage covered. And there's a formula. It can't exceed 90% of your wages. But if you look at where the cap is for where they stop taxing you, this has been tied to the Social Security limit, which is, and I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it's $185,000 is where Social Security shuts off right now. So employees and employers are paying 1% up to that cap. If you do the math out and say, okay, divide that by 52, okay, I'm getting, that's $3,500 a week. I don't have a calculator, but we'll call it somewhere in that range. And you're getting $1,200. That means you're getting like a 1/3 benefit. So this program was designed to ensure that the most vulnerable had the biggest benefit. But employers also need to understand that, hey, if you've got a lot of employees that are higher earners, and I don't mean like that they're at that 185 or beyond that. I would say you have earners that are over $80,000 or $90,000 a year, which with inflation, that's most employers have people that are in that range. They're not going to have meaningful income replacement just based off of the paid leave program. And if you're relying on that 100%, you may have a gap where your employees are going to have some pain, some additional financial pain in addition to whatever they have going on. And that's where you tie into, okay, what's a short-term disability policy, which is going to cover some things, but not all of the things. But if it's a medical reason, then chances are they could maybe get up to 60% of their earnings without having as low of a cap. So there are a lot of moving parts, and it really helps to kind of look at the whole thing and say, okay, with my employee base, my company, what's important to me, and how do I make sure that these gaps are not causing headaches that I could have solved?
You mentioned before also the sort of decision along the way of like sort of how much to award and all that. I'm not sure even I'm clear on exactly how the decision is made when I claim it. So let's just say I have a death in the family or something like that, which would certainly be something that qualifies for this. You get the possibility of up to 12 weeks, right? But do I just get 12 weeks? I mean, if I say I want 12 weeks, do I get it? Is it something that's tied to the event where, grieving takes a couple weeks, so you get 2? I mean, that strikes me as very vague about exactly what you would be entitled to get. And it strikes me as something else that would make it more likely that more time is taken in general, so long as the financial benefit is at least something that's survivable or whatever. You know what I mean? I would take time at 90% of my salary if I'm given it. So I would take 12 weeks.
Yeah. So I'm going to get a little over my skis here,
That's okay.
and not be a full expert in how the state is going to administer it and how they're going to determine what is the duration.
Isn't that kind of part of the point, though? Is that
yes,
nobody knows?
Yeah. What I'm hoping and what I'm going to say is definitely going to happen on a privately funded program where you're using an insurance company is I'm going to compare it to disability. So for a medical condition, this is a much easier situation than we've got something else going on. So it's a medical condition. There is so much data out there that says, okay, if I have a knee replacement done, I should be, based on the type of job that I have, I should be out of work for 8 weeks. So if I should only be out of work for 8 weeks, I would hope that these policies are going to say you're going to be out for 8 weeks unless there's a reason that it needs to be extended. On the case of bonding leave for children, so that's whether they're adopted, their own children, that is going to be you're allowed up to 12 weeks.
And you take how much you want.
And you take how much you want.
Yeah.
If there's also a domestic violence leave. So you've been a victim of domestic violence or someone close to you in your family has, you take the time that you need up to 12 weeks. And those are cases where you're like, you want people to take however much time they need. But I don't think those are going to have a limit on them. It's going to be, how much time do you need? Medical, I think they might have a better basis because there's a huge amount of information that says what's reasonable for this. Typically, when you have a state-run insurance program, it tends to run a little hotter than it was planned.
That's the universal truth.
Yeah.
It's just always like that. I mean, the best example of that recently is the Medicaid expansion program that Governor Mills sort of instituted once she took office in 2019. They had a plan. They had a number of people they thought were going to sign up. They thought there was a cost that they knew it was going to be.
Yep.
And as we predicted here, and there's a report on our website if you want to see it, it was massively underestimating what was really going to happen, which just means that the state's on the hook for more cost and it's run less efficiently. And I don't know, I guess if that's what you want, you know what I mean? Like, then keep supporting ideas like this, keep supporting bills like this. But it strikes me as the same failed kind of model that we've seen in not just healthcare, but in so many different areas too. It's frustrating. And I can't imagine businesses right now trying to figure out and cope with all of this stuff and understand what is going to happen. I mean, if you can't even tell me who's going to make the decision, that's scary. If I'm a business.
Yeah. And it's probably been published who's making that decision, what's going on there. I've been focused more on the let's find solutions that I know are going to be managed in a way that is going to be efficient, which is why I've focused on helping employers find that private plan option to move into it. But the state isn't done tinkering with this law, because there's a piece of legislation out there right now where they want to restrict the ability of a small group of businesses further around paid family leave. There are programs in the state that have worked well for years on workers' comp, where multiple employers will join a trust and have a workers' comp program that is a self-funded trust with multiple employers in it. They've worked great. They follow all the rules. They're managed by the Bureau of Insurance. And there were a few of those that got approval to do the same thing for paid family leave. So a lot of the groups that were already in programs like that looked and said, hey, we want to do this. There's a bill in the legislature right now to restrict that type of pooling of risk on paid family leave. I have no reason I can't understand why they want to restrict it. These plans don't offer substandard benefits. They don't offer different benefits. They're just financing the risk in a different collective way.
Yeah. And
that's the way they want to do it. For the state to come in and say, hey, we want to change it and we want to take away one of the options. It concerns me that there's something else at play that I don't know what it is, because I can't come up with a reason of why to take away one of the few options that people have right now.
Yeah. I've talked to businesses that barely know this program exists.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of the essence of all this is there's varying levels of awareness in the business community about what it is, how it works, when it starts, how much money we're paying. I mean, everybody had to deal with the compliance of the taxes and whatnot, but I mean, even a few weeks ago, I heard somebody, I overheard a conversation with a business owner, but they were asking, like, sort of, when does it start and what is it? And if you're in that place, you shouldn't be. Your business, you should probably be paying attention to this at a little bit more of a level that warrants how important the program is. But I think it just sort of highlights the confusion, of a new program and the scope of it, and how I think messy the implementation of it will be. Right?
Yes.
There's problems coming.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would add, if people that are in leadership at businesses don't know how they're handling this, aren't sure what they're doing, or just have kind of taken the ostrich technique of putting their head in the sand and saying, I'm just kind of going with the 1%. It's worth a conversation with someone that's knowledgeable to say, hey, what are my options here? Because it could be a significant savings. And in any case, I mean, I see groups that are 20 to 30% below the state rate. And when you're talking about 1% of all wages, depending on the size of your company, that could be a significant savings. And there's no guarantee on any of those things. It's going to depend on your workforce, the demographics, the geography, all of those individual underwriting factors. But those things are going to help you, and working with someone that understands how does the law work, what do we need to do, what do you need to do as an employer, is going to keep you out of those compliance problems. No one wants a compliance headache when they're trying to run a business. Partnering with someone that can kind of navigate those waters and make sure that okay, we've given the right notices to our employees about what program we're in. We're funding it appropriately. It's set up right with our payroll vendor. Everything is linked up and working well. Those are the pieces that if you miss them, all of a sudden you could have a serious problem. Do we know what the penalties are for non-compliance? No. I mean, it'd be really hard to not comply, because you're having to pay the tax, or you're having to submit proof of your policy that has been submitted to the state, and they do charge you $500 to apply to put that substitute plan in place. So I think it's hard to not comply with contributing to the program, but how to appropriately administer it and make sure that you're following the rules. That's where I think there's going to be a lot of the headaches coming, because we've got less than 2 months and this goes live. Yeah. And there's still plenty of time to address those things. And even after that date, you can still address, hey, how are we handling this? What are we doing? But you really want to have the right people on your team that are advising you on how you structure these things and how you manage it.
We didn't even talk about lawsuits outside of me just mentioning they may happen, but you want to talk about costs. You want to talk about lost time. There's it's inevitable that it'll happen. There'll be disagreements and confusions, and people will sue to get what they're entitled to and all that.
Yep.
So that's another element that's not currently in place in Maine, and all of a sudden you're going to have to deal with that if you're an employer. And
yeah, I mean, you're going to have there is an appeal process built in. So there's an appeal process, but it's an insurance product. So if you go through the appeal process and you feel that you've been wronged, the only remedy typically beyond that is to litigate it. And I'm sure there will be some cases where, okay, we're trying to define what is this family-like relationship, or what is the specific things that fall under these buckets that are covered. And that's going to take 5 years before we really know how does that develop, because the courts are overburdened with just the amount of legal work they have right now.
The problems have to develop. They have to sue over it. It has to go through the system, delays, etc. It will be years.
I would love if this program just works phenomenally well. Like I would be over the moon happy that, okay, it was expensive and it's an extra tax, but if it runs super smooth and it doesn't require increases in the rate, then that would probably be the happiest I could be. Do I think that's going to happen? No, probably not. There's enough moving parts, and it's a new program that I do think we're going to have some speed bumps, and we're going to have to work through those things. And it's making decisions now to determine which program do you want to participate in. Really making those decisions a year ago was even better. But there's still time now to kind of analyze and look and say, okay, do I have options that can put me in a better place?
What have we missed out of all of this stuff? Are there other lingering concerns or things that maybe business owners should be aware of or thinking about, planning for, that type of thing, or questions you have about the program that just have gone unanswered thus far? Anything stick in your mind?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is with this or any program, you need to make sure you're aware of what you need to do as the employer. If people are listening to this and saying, "Geez, I really don't know what we're doing," that's a moment to kind of stop and be like, "Okay, we don't know what's going on. We need to figure this out because we've got a very short run here." I would also say that if you're a business and you're buying insurance products of any type, which is every business has some level of insurance products, and the partners that you're working with haven't been talking to you about this as a main employer over the last year to even 18 months, you may want to talk to someone else, because this has been coming and it's been identified as a serious need to be in compliance. And that's really where compliance is never the exciting topic. But as someone that's been in business for a while, I never want to be the one that's violating a government law or regulation and having them come knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, here's a big fine," because those fines are typically not very, they're not small. They're not friendly, and you can't do a lot to get out of them. So stay ahead of this, plan for it, and treat this like any other aspect of your capital expense around employees. Most Maine businesses, their employees' wages and all of the supplemental benefits that are associated with that are their biggest expense. You can plan for this, but you need to stay out ahead of it. You need to be talking to the right people and really making sure that you have a focus that is on the long-term view of this and how am I going to handle this, and not have it just be one more thing that's, I think about it once a year and then I forget it.
Scott Wellman, chairman of the board of Maine Policy Institute, talking a little bit about the Paid Family Medical Leave Act in Maine and what we're likely to see in the upcoming months. Isn't that fun? So yes. It's a pretty decent overview. Obviously, you have questions or whatever, forward them to us, and we'll happily answer them. But we appreciate you guys watching as always. Thanks, Scott, for stopping by.
Thank you.
And giving us this information. And we'll be back again very soon for another Pine Tree Pulse. See you then.
This has been Pine Tree Pulse, disrupting the Maine political machine, one podcast at a time. Visit mainepolicy.org to learn more, or follow the Maine Policy Institute on social media. Thanks for listening, and make sure to join us again next time.